So I know this is kind of a weird spot to start a video on photography. It's not very photogenic looking, but if you can tell, I've actually got my camera positioned right there, and from the camera standpoint, it actually looks a lot better because there's this long metal pipe and then there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's also kind of a difficult subject to photograph properly because the light at the end is just so much brighter than the rest of the photo. So either I could take a photo where the light looks good or where the foreground looks good, but I can't really get a photo where the exposure is perfect for both of them. So a lot of photographers in a case like this would use this technique called HDR photography. So basically you could take one photo that's too dark, one photo that's too bright, maybe a couple photos in between, and then you end up with a shot that looks like this. And to me, this actually does look pretty good, but there's a method that I like even more, and that's called image averaging. So I do prefer image averaging overall, but before I explain why that is, let me just show you a proof of concept. I'm going to demonstrate that I can get the exact same looking photo as that HDR using image averaging. So let me do that. I'm going to take a series of 4 photos. So these are the 4 photos, and I can average them together and then just boost up the shadows a little bit and play around with that in post-processing. And then here's the final result. Looks very similar to the HDR, and I can also zoom into the darker shadow areas, and you can see that the level of noise is basically the same between these 2 photos. So you can see that image averaging can give you a similar result, but why would anyone use it if HDR already exists? Well, the reason is HDR is not a perfect technique. There's definitely a few flaws with it. Number one, a lot of HDR software, at least by default, is going to give you these really harsh and intense looking edits, really not what a lot of photographers are after. Image averaging doesn't give you something that looks quite like that. To me, it's a little bit better, but really the main reason to use image averaging instead of HDR is if you have anything that's moving in your photo. Movement does not play well with HDR photography. Frequently you'll end up with these odd artifacts in your photo, either some ghosting artifacts or halos around your subject. It just doesn't look that good, and image averaging can actually look significantly better. So let me move to a different location and I'll demonstrate that with a real world subject that has a little bit of movement. Now you can probably tell that it's not even particularly windy right now, but there is a little bit of a breeze, and whenever the gust of wind comes by, some of those tree leaves on the palm tree behind me start to move. And of course, from photo to photo, they might not move that much, but even a little bit of movement can lead to some strange blending artifacts when I try to make an HDR. So let me do that right now, and I'll explain what I mean. I'm going to select 3 frames and 1 stop of exposure difference. When this is on, the camera's going to automatically take that HDR. So I can take a really quick burst of photos, like that, and here's how the 3 photos look. Clearly there's not that much movement, but when you zoom in, there is a little bit that you can see. The palm leaves aren't in the exact same spot from photo to photo, and actually creating an HDR right here, I definitely have the potential to have some weird artifacts around the edge of the palm leaves. This, I think, demonstrates that pretty clearly. And that's not ideal. It would take a decent amount of time to fix that in Photoshop. So that's why, at least in this case, I would much rather use the image averaging method instead. So to do that, I'm going to actually turn off the auto exposure blending, and I'm also going to decrease the exposure compensation. In this case, I'm going to do -0.7, and the goal here is just to have nothing in the photo at all that's overexposed. You can't recover anything that's overexposed, but this image blending technique lets you recover shadow details really well. So now that I've done that, I'm going to take a quick burst of photos. In this case, I'm going to do 4 photos in sequence. And you can see these 4 photos, again, look very similar between the shots. But the difference right here is the way that I blend these together no longer creates these weird artifacts. In fact, my final image average looks like this. And when I zoom in, any of those areas that had movement now just kind of look a little bit blurred. And I know that this also isn't ideal. I mean, in a best case scenario, there wouldn't be any movement here at all. But I think that it's a lot better than having those weird artifacts. In this case, it basically just looks like I had used a slightly longer shutter speed in the first place. And that's why if I'm taking pictures from a tripod and there's anything moving in my photo, even if it's not my main subject, I basically don't do HDRs anymore. These days I'll either do image averaging or I'll just try to get the photo correct in a single shot. And hopefully this demonstration kind of explained why, but I haven't really yet gone into how to take image averages and blend them together as well as possible. It's not that complicated, but let me just demonstrate that next. So to actually create your image average, you're going to take all those photos that you just captured, and then put them into some software like Photoshop, anything that lets you open those photos as layers. So generally the method that you can use to average them is to select all of those layers, convert to a smart object, and then go up to the smart object stacking options and click mean. Some photographers tell you to click median. I prefer the look with mean, but either way, this is going to, after a little bit of a delay, average your photos together so that you've eliminated a lot of that noise. And it's really important when you're averaging these photos together that there isn't anything in the picture that's overexposed. This image averaging technique is really useful for recovering shadow detail, but it doesn't help you for recovering highlights, so make sure that none of your highlights are overexposed. Now specifically, the amount of shadow improvement that you can get with this technique just depends on how many photos that you take. Every time that you double the number of photos, you're going to improve the detail in the shadows by 1 stop. So if you take 2 photos, you've improved the noise by 1 stop, 4 photos gives you 2 stops, 8 photos for 3 stops, and so on. And that brings me to probably the biggest problem with image averaging. If you want more than maybe 3 or 4 stops of improvement, you're just going to need to take a ton of photos. HDR, you don't need nearly as many by comparison, so image averaging is mainly useful when you'd want to mimic more of a basic, maybe 3 photo or at the most 5 photo HDR. Specifically, the math works out where you could mimic a 3 image HDR with 4 photos through image averaging, but if you want to mimic a 5 image HDR, you'd need 16 pictures to image average for the same result. So that's clearly not always going to be practical if you go beyond that point. And image averaging is also a little bit trickier than HDR because it requires slightly more specialized software. For example, Adobe Lightroom can easily merge HDRs, but it doesn't have an image averaging option. That's not really the end of the world. Most photographers probably have software that can do image averaging, but it does probably mess up some photographers' workflow a little bit. So this definitely is not a perfect technique, and the point is not that image averaging should completely replace HDR. Personally, I still use HDR in cases like this, where there's nothing moving in the photo and I needed 5 images to capture all of that dynamic range. But in situations where there is movement in my photo, I pretty much exclusively use image averaging these days, and I kind of recommend that you do the same thing. I know that it's not the orthodox technique, but it works really well, especially if you're photographing subjects like the ocean, or even if there's just a little bit of wind that could rustle some leaves in your photo. It's a very useful technique, and I hope that you find it useful as well. As always, let me know below the video if you've got any questions, and if you want to see more lesser-known photography tricks like this, just follow my channel and hit the little bell notification button on YouTube. I'm Spencer Cox, and I'll see you next time.